Welcome. Welcome to our Russia and China Preparing America for Our Greatest Strategic Challenge evening. I'm Christine Scheckler, the president of the San Diego World Affairs Council. And we'll have two speakers tonight. And we're going to change the format a little bit just to give you a heads up. And that format will allow you to write your questions in the chat box from the beginning, which we always encourage, but we're going to answer the questions throughout the evening. We're going to have some opening comments from each of the speakers and kind of a lead-in question. And then after that, our John Schlosser will be the moderator, and he'll lead in with a few of his questions, and then he'll be looking at the chat. If everybody can stay on mute, please. Everybody should be on mute. Stay on mute. Okay. Jill, can I have the slide with the house rules? So just a reminder, please, to keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. And we are recording, and the recording will be shared. So if you don't want to be seen, then please keep the video off, your video off. And again, we'll have Q&A throughout the event. So just write your question in the chat box. John and I will be kind of moderating that. Okay, and we'll start with the first speaker and our books. Oh, yes, we can do it this way. Okay, so Jack Devine wrote Spymaster's Prism, The Fight Against Russian Aggression. I've quickly read these two books, and from what I've read so far, I can't wait to read them more slowly. They're packed with a lot of information that's riveting. So in this case, just one of the comments about Jack's book is Jack Devine's comprehensive history of Russian intelligence efforts against the United States and the West could not be more timely. As amply noted in the book, election meddling, disinformation, and assassination attempts are all modern descendants of a long Russian tradition of espionage and subversion that has been renewed with a vengeance today. Devine's highly readable style and insider experience and intelligence makes this must-read study a persuasive warning to implement the measures he suggests to thwart this threat to our national security. Also, in his book, he offers key lessons from our intelligence successes and failures over the past 75 years that will help us determine how to address our current strategic shortfall, emerge ahead of the Russians, and be prepared for what's to come from any adversary. And one comment I wanted to read that was pursuant to his topic. I have it, not lost it. Oh, here it is. Okay. And from Jack's book, again, The Fight Against Russian Aggression, he has a quote in there from Abdur Rahman Khan, founder of modern Afghanistan. And the quote is, "My last words to you, my son and successor, never trust the Russians." So that is from Jack's book. Again, whoops, so you can see it. There you go. And I will now do the same for Dr. Jonathan Ward's book, China's Vision of Victory and Why America Must Win. Sorry. There we go. Jonathan Ward has provided an eye-opening analysis of China's strategic ambitions. He effectively demolishes the long-standing expectation in Washington that a prosperous rising China will be content to integrate itself into Western international order. To the contrary, he demonstrates that Beijing's objectives include nothing less than renovating that order to serve China's own strategic interests. It's also a must-read for the Russia, China, and the United States discussions today. And so from the parts of the book, both books that I read and the theme that we want to start with, we have two small questions which lead kind of to one bigger question. Will adjustments on the global stage be made through force and coercion or diplomacy and dialogue? America needs its own grand strategy. What should it look like? So the question we're going to lead off with, Jack will do the first response, and then Jonathan, and then our John Schlosser will take it from there. Do we wish the global stage to be defined by the embrace of force and coercion as national tools of choice, or do we wish to continue to value rules-based agreement and the proven practices of diplomacy and dialogue? And for those that were able to watch some of the opening comments this week for the United Nations, we also think this is very timely discussion, Russia, China, and the region, and Myanmar. So again, let me just remind everybody to please put your question, try to make your questions succinct if you can, but put those in the chat box, and John and I will try to make sure that Jack and Jonathan can tackle those. So Jack, if you'd like to make the opening comments. You're on speaker. I mean, sorry, you're on mute. Jack, you're on mute. There you go. Oop, you're back on mute. You're back on mute.
How's that?
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I won't touch any more buttons. So I think the way we talked about, Christine, I'm going to talk a bit about why I wrote the book and so on, and then we'll get to those questions. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
I think when you write a book, you need to talk about what are your qualifications. So I'm just very quickly going to give you life with Jack. So I joined the agency as I actually taught school, high school, and I never got over the fact of trying to be an educator of some type. And it was a great skill to bring into the intelligence business, believe it or not, and we can elaborate on that at some point. I welcome any question on any subject related to the intelligence business. But I spent 32 years in the CIA, and I started out as a trainee. I actually sat 10 feet away when I first joined the agency from Rick Ames. He was the famous spy inside of CIA. Betrayed 11 of our agents, all of them executed. But I knew him well. And from there, I went to Chile, and I was in Chile, and there's other steps along the way. It was my first assignment, and I was there when Allende was overthrown, and we can talk about that. And I had a few other assignments in Latin America, and I decided at a certain point that it was time for me to move away from the Central American program because I found that, well, I wanted to fight the Nicaraguans and the communists in Nicaragua. I wanted to do it a different way inside, and I wasn't enthusiastic about the idea of a Contra program. So I thought I was really smart as a young man and moved to Iran branch in the Middle East, changed of pace in 1985. And those of you who are historians, 1985 was the beginning of the Iran-Contra affair. And I got involved in dealing with Govani Far and Ali North, and I ended up in the courts and everything else, but I was opposed to it. It's on record. But I never knew that the money was going to Central America. So as far as I tried to run away from it, it came back to haunt me. But because of, I think, some of the positions I took on that issue, they put me in charge of the Afghan program to drive the Russians out of Afghanistan in 1986. And it's euphemistically called Charlie Wilson's War. And I knew Charlie. I traveled with this Texas congressman. I am delighted to have known him, the real character of the First Order. But it wasn't his war. He was a great propagandist, and he was an excellent proponent. But it was a U.S. government program, organized, lawyers overseeing it. I mean, it was a much more traditional logistical effort, and it's caught up. And I don't want the American people thinking that that's how you run wars with a congressman and a wild, crazy agency officer. But Charlie actually gave me that plaque that you read at the beginning, Never Trust the Russians. And it was sort of, I hung it in my office for years. I almost called the book Never Trust the Russians. But he and I and our wives had dinner in Sparks Restaurant in New York City. And if you know anything about New York City and Sparks Restaurants, that's where Paul Castellano, the head of the mafia, was gunned down. And Charlie thought it was very romantic to be there. And he reached across the table at a certain point and he said, well, Jack, I know you didn't like the book. You're going to hate the movie. So he had a great sense of humor. But from there, I then went on to be our representative, our chief in Rome. I actually was chief of 5 different stations around the world, and I led a couple divisions. And I went back and I also ran the counter narcotics program when Pablo Escobar met his demise. And then from there, I became the number 2 person for all of CIA's worldwide operations. And then eventually, I was the acting director. And then I signed myself to a European station, which no one admits that we have a representative, but everybody above the age of 6 knows we have an office there. And I'll leave that mystery to reading the book. And then in 2000, I retired from the agency and opened an intelligence business in the private sector that's home-based in New York. And I provide intelligence for some of the major financial institutions and help them sort out through problems around the world. So I've stayed very close to the intelligence world. And when I left the agency, they lifted my cover because I'd been touched with so many things that became public and I became identified with them. But I was reluctant to tell people where I worked. I just spent years doing it. And I got a call from a journalist one day, and I got a call from the CIA saying, look, we can't ask you to do an interview, but there's a Washington Post writer who's going to write a story about the Chile Allende affair. And we'd like to have somebody talk about it. So in a moment of bravado, I said, oh, I'll do that. So next thing you know, it was a full-page story in the Washington Post. And since then, I've never been able to walk back. And then later on, I was approached and someone said, why don't you write a book? Let me introduce you to a literary agent. Andrew Wiley is one of the great literary writers in this country. And for some reason, he liked the idea of having me do a book. And the first book, and we didn't bring it today, but it's called Good Hunting, and it's more semi-autobiography, but it talks about the use of force. And I'm really glad you're queuing up that question. When do you use force, or your word, coercion? And I go into the principles of that, and I'm going to come back to it in the general session. But several years later, I wrote Spymaster Prison. It came out in March. I was actually reading what I thought was a nice little book about Cold War people and people that I admired left over from the OSS in World War II, and how much I admired them. And then the 2016 election came along, and the Russians interfered in our political process. And I decided I was going to write another book. And the other book is basically, the Russians never stopped. They dropped communism like a hot potato, as they should, but they didn't drop being a Cold War strategy of us being the adversary. And I was surprised when I found out that they intervened in the 2016 election. I thought, this is not the ground rules under which we operated in the Cold War. There's such a thing as the Moscow rules in the intelligence world. It's unwritten. You can't find it. No one can find you a copy of it. But there was an understanding that we wouldn't counterfeit each other's money. We wouldn't beat up each other's officers. Now, there's a few exceptions there, but not many. But one of the most important ones, and a very serious issue, was we fought each other around the world in country after country, but we never interfered, with very minor exceptions on the Russian side, in the political process in each other's country. So I was so incensed by that, and I didn't feel that the coverage, which was immense, was picking up on how much of a seismic change that was in behavior, how risky it was, and whether they were interested in one candidate or another. That wasn't the real game plan. It was to weaken our political process. And I wanted to scream that to the top of the rooftops. Now, a lot of people say, why don't you write a book on China? China is indeed our geopolitical challenge of the future. But they're not meddling in our elections. The other thing, I've been reading a very fascinating article today about the use of private military companies by the Russians. And it really has me thinking about writing, an op-ed. And it talks about how Russia is using paramilitary force around the world. They're a very small GDP, like France or Spain, not France, but Spain or Italy. they're punching way above their weight, and they're really challenging us. And now Jonathan is a real authority on China, and he will tell you the things that we need to be worried about. But what I'm telling you is, in the intelligence world, the one that's actually operating against us, it's not just collecting information, not being competitive military, operation in the intelligence world, and we're not paying enough attention to either in the public sphere or in the private sphere, and that's why I wrote the book. And there's an old saying, and those of you that may have remembered reading about General MacArthur, when he retired in the Congress, he said, old soldiers never die, they fade away. And I would say, old spy masters never die, they fade away, unless they have a pen, and then you can stay in the game a long time. So I'm a spy master, and that is somebody that has run people who run spies. And I have a chapter in a book called The Spymaster President, and that's Putin. He was a KGB officer, has maintained that mentality. And there's a way of looking at the world, and he looks at that and very much as he did as a young man when the Soviet Union fell apart. And I think we need to realize he is reinvigorated, more effective than his predecessors, the Cold War strategy, and then has added a much more rigorous dimension. I want to stop here because I can start to get deep into the book, which is titled Spymaster's Prison. That means how I look at the world through that unique prism. And it's about the struggle that we've had unending, not only in the past, but up until the Biden administration, until today. I go right up to today in the book. And it's about how the Russians look at us. And I think this is a really important discussion. And I'm really excited to have Jonathan once again by my side to talk about, and very few people are doing it. We're actually doing this, and we've done it several times with other councils, or a few times anyway. And that's to put the juxtaposition. Is both of them are terribly important, but for different reasons. So with your indulgence, I think I want to stop there and turn it over to my distinguished colleague, Jonathan Ward, unless someone else wants to intercede with some additional comment.
The only comment I want to make is, unless there's some problem, everybody has gone black screen. And I don't know if we did that on purpose, but I think we like to see faces. And so you don't have to be black screen unless you've chosen to do that. Jonathan, if you want to go ahead and take the floor, please.
Sure. So it's great to be here tonight with all of you. And it's so much fun to be with my friend and mentor, Jack. I mean, we've known each other for a long time, and we've done several presentations together where we bring Jack's really deep book about Russian aggression and my book about Chinese grand strategy together in order to present what we both see as the fundamental challenge to the United States. And this will go back to the questions, Christine, that you've asked about the question of the use of force or diplomacy, and really what sort of world have we wound up with now that we've had the rise of two absolutely serious adversaries that have very clear strategies, that are executing successfully on these strategies for the most part, and that have really essentially profited from a period of American lack of attention to these deep and serious issues. And that's put them in a position where the fundamental question at the end of the day that I think is on many of our minds is, what's going to happen to America? And how do we adjust to this? What are we going to do? Can we still win these contests? Or is it in some ways too late? And I wrote China's Vision of Victory, and the cover is not quite visible here, but really of a sea of sort of the communist Chinese flag rising up, to Lady Liberty's face. And just, I was very, very concerned that we weren't going to wake up to the challenge posed by the Communist Party and the Chinese state. And for me, my journey, and I appreciate this ability to talk about how we got to where we got in terms of writing these books and putting these ideas out into the world. For me, it began essentially as a teenager when I became very, very interested in large countries and just sort of these major states that I realized were going to have consequences in my lifetime. So I began, I lived in India while I was a Columbia student. I learned Russian and Chinese language at Columbia and began this long journey of understanding what we now call the major powers. But to me, they were basically large states that were fundamentally different, but in interesting ways to obviously the world I'd grown up in. And I wanted to understand really what was going to happen in the world in our time. And I had this facility with languages. So I wanted to learn the world's most widely spoken languages, began with Russian, Chinese, Spanish. I'd grown up with that, eventually learned Arabic, spent time in the Middle East, and spent about 10 years living abroad, half of which was living essentially out of a backpack in all these interesting places and traversing them, hitchhiking, traveling by cargo ship, staying in villages and getting to know Russia, China, India, Middle East, Latin America, essentially by living with people in these countries in remote areas and understanding how regular people saw the world, which was what I wanted to know. And I wound up then at Oxford, initially doing a degree in Russia-China relations because I had those two languages. And then moved into China-India relations under the direction of my supervisor and got into a very deep study of the founding decades of the People's Republic of China and the original vision of the founders of the country that we're dealing with today, the founders including Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. I mean, what really did they see as China's destiny? Why did they create this new nation, and why did they position that nation for conflict and war with many of their own neighbors, which they did. And my doctorate was in the war with India, using diplomatic archival sources that explained their thinking, their broader strategy. And in the process of all that, I mean, my travels in China, being in Xinjiang and Tibet in my early 20s, seeing what those regions that we now understand are under a process of genocide by the Communist Party of China, seeing what that was really like when most Americans were saying, let's invest in China, let's build factories in China, let's do business with China. And I thought, my God, there's this very disturbing side to the rise of this place that, is going to undermine our hopes for integration and for bringing them into the world stage. And I think we know today that is true, that the objective of engagement, i.e. a stable world order that we could share with China is very much not, those hopes have been dashed. And instead, I think we've now come to realize that the ambitions of the Communist Party are just antithetical to a US-led order. And they're quite serious about every sort of strategic program they've got, from a military buildup that's designed for combat with the United States to a genocide taking place in Xinjiang to industrial policies that are designed to dominate the critical industries of the future, to a diplomatic strategy that's meant to create divisions in our alliance systems and coerce other states. So we're dealing with something that is fundamentally dangerous and in many ways an existential challenge, at least to the order built by the United States and other democracies that's meant to preserve, human freedom in the form of a global system. So these are the challenges that we're facing. And, I think we're quite fortunately awake to much of that. I mean, one just needs to read a newspaper to see the constant coverage of what China, its government, its Communist Party is up to. But that really begs the question, what are we supposed to do about this? How do we, handle this challenge, and how do we preserve an order that is favorable to the United States, favorable to our values, to our freedoms, to our rights, to all the things that we truly care about, and that many, many nations across the earth also care about. Will those all be in jeopardy because, a state like the People's Republic of China has grown rich and powerful, or can we defend this, and can we preserve this, and can we ultimately find our way through this, troubled geopolitical gauntlet that will present, I think, the dominant, the main challenge of our time, how we deal with all this. So we all live in that problem now. We all live in that reality. And I think one of my concerns, and I say this as someone who spent a lot of time abroad and have, come back to America, only in the past 4 years or so. I mean, I was overseas for a long time. And to me, the new question is, where does America go? How do we deal with this? And how do we present find our own strategy that can work for us and head off these challenges. And that's going to be, I think, actually a very exciting time because, great difficulties like this can lead to, I think, really digging deep and finding the real possibilities, finding what we're really made of, what we can be at our best. So that's my hope for the United States, is that we're able to find some version of ourselves that addresses these challenges through playing to all of our strengths and everything that's really innovative and ingenious about the United States. And that's my favorite thing now, is just discovering sort of what America is capable of and asking those sorts of questions. And, whether it's economically, militarily, culturally, diplomatically, I mean, we have quite a great country here that I think can meet these challenges, but we have to focus and we have to understand, that these things are real and form a program that will allow us to deal with them. In my background, I mean, I just remember on one of my great uncle who was in the OSS, with which, Jack referenced before. I mean, he gave me Thomas Friedman's book when I was 22 and headed on a train from Moscow to Beijing, having completed my language degrees at Columbia. And he said, see if you can go make sense of this world. The world is flat. And I just, on that train ride, on the Trans-Siberian, I saw so many things just on that alone. And then I began my 5 years around the world. But on that train ride alone, I saw so many things that made it absolutely clear that we were not living in something as characterized by Friedman. It wasn't a flat world. It was a very complex world. It was countries that have deep, visions of where they're going to go and where they've come from that we never decided to understand. And we have to have an understanding of countries and regions and, the history of major places in order to deal with the contest at hand. And if we can do that, it will be to our advantage. So I think that was something that was missing in a lot of the time that we sort of fell into a disadvantage vis-a-vis some of these states. And, we're going to have to be very, very wise and knowledgeable about the world in order to confront these very deep challenges now.
John, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've got some penetrating questions already in the queue, but I think maybe I'll take advantage of my position as moderator of the Q&A session to begin with a question that is provoked really by both presentations, which were excellent, albeit brief, and I think really sort of summarized the challenges that we face on both fronts, the Russia front, the China front. And so I would put my question something like this. I try to draw you out on whether you believe that it is really possible for the United States to confront successfully both of these challenges, to mobilize adequate support on the part of our allies and friends in the world to address these really sort of simultaneous challenges. And I would point to some of the discussion after our current president's first trip to Europe, to the effect that our European allies were kind of cool to the idea of mobilizing against the China threat. Angela Merkel in particular was more interested in continued trade and investment with China. I believe that China is pretty much their largest trade partner now. Of course, Merkel is going to be departing the scene, but her successor is said to be even more pro-China. So, that is one factor. Now you see just recently that the president seems to have worked with his British and Australian counterparts to create a kind of a new tripod, if you will. Interesting foreign policy departure for the Brits, their first big one since they've left the EU. And that is very much focused on China. But where does that leave us vis-a-vis Russia? I have a lot of interest myself, having been in Poland at the time, both before, during, and after NATO enlargement to include Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. about whether we really adequately have equipped our Central and Eastern European allies to deal with the Russian threat that continues there. Can we lead in Europe and then lead in China? Lead vis-a-vis China at the same time. That would be my opening gambit, if you will. So I toss it out to either of the two gentlemen, perhaps starting with Jack.
John, this is a profound question. It really is, and it gets the heart of it. You know, you all know, remember, many of Tip O'Neill, you know, all politics are local. And I think the issue for ourselves, and let me just make one point clear. I think however weak we may have looked in the Afghan exit, really people should not get confused. We have the most powerful military on the face of the earth. We have the strongest intelligence group. I mean, these are things that I think you sit around the table and you get all the partisans you want, but they'll probably come down with that agreement. It isn't the capability part that I think I'm worried about. I visited a government agency that I'm fond of, and I was escorted by a young woman, and she said, "We're in mourning because, you know, we spent 20 years working in Afghanistan, and now so many things are left undone behind." And I understand that. That's not hard for all of us to focus on. But her second point was more important. And as we don't know where we're going, right? So I want to come back. I think we can deal with the allies. I think we can have, you know, a strong, robust foreign policy. But in all of the years that I've been, you know, in the intelligence business and around it, and just in life lesson, we're at a very funny point. Not funny. Let me change that word. There's nothing funny about it. I don't think we're clear on who we are and what we want to be on the world stage. Let us not be, I said, we are a very powerful country. Most of the world has always thought we're much more powerful than we ourselves. Our presidents are much more powerful and viewed more powerfully around the world. And we have been judicious in using it. I know we can talk about that. So I think the other part of your question, Christine, earlier is, where are we going? Whether it's Russia or China, what is the grand strategy? And so, John, I'm coming back. You have very good questions. How are we going to deal with the allies, right? And how are we going to trade off China and Russia interests? But I want to answer because I think it's a more profound question you have, which is, where do what I told the young woman, I said, look, don't worry about it inside this building. This is going to be decided for you externally. The Congress is going to decide, the president's going to decide, and they're going to decide because eventually the American people are going to have some sense. And it could be a wishy-washy, divided view out there among our populace, as I'm troubled to say. But I think we have to come together as a people and begin to say, what is our role? And I have a view on what I think it ought to be, but I want to save that and let Jonathan chime in. But this isn't just about Russia and China. This is really, as I said, Tip O'Neill. Who are we? What do we want to be? What type of role? How do we want to exercise that role? And I think it's and this is not a partisan question. This is a bipartisan decision, and both houses, both parties need to have a better grip on a united view of who we are.
Right, and as to what to do, it really is those two questions. I mean, who are we and where are we going? And, what's necessary here? And I mean, to me, there's a few fundamental things that the United States has to do strategically in order to meet not only the China challenge, but the broader picture. And in China's Vision of Victory, I laid out 3 things we need to do in response to what's mostly a book about, primary sources explaining Chinese strategies across the planet and across, various different domains of power. We have to win an economic contest. We have to make sure that we are the world's leading economy. Forget about ceding that to China. You cannot let China become the world's leading economy. Number 1. Number two, you have to unite the democratic world. The world's democracies are the fundamental counterweight. It's a global system potentially that is very much ours to lead and has brilliant players of all sizes in it that can create a power structure that I believe can withstand, if deployed right, this whole problem. And third, you have to maintain military deterrence over both Russia and China. And that's where, as Jack said, I mean, we do have the world's greatest military, and the ability to make sure that we're not overmatched in either theater is going to be important. And looking at this, today is, it's not just Europe for Europe and Asia for Asia. You have to have a global integration of our alliance system, and you have to have an alliance-based trading system. And we're going to have to build a world in which the US is really the center of economic gravity, and a world economy that relies far less on the People's Republic of China. And for many people, that may be unthinkable today, but that's really, I think, the heart of the problem, because from economic power, the ability to resource a global grand strategy, you can win the other contests, you can win the diplomatic and military contests. But if we fail in the economic domain, then eventually we'll lose the military balance and we'll lose our ability to wage the diplomacy that we need. So fundamentally, it begins, America has always brought, in all of our history, I mean, at least since really rising as a major power, we've brought superior economic heft to every contest we've ever had to fight. And if we lose that in the decade ahead, and this is the decade where we may lose that, I mean, many people from JP Morgan to the National Intelligence Council have all predicted that China surpasses us by 2030. But that's the first game we have to win. We have to maintain deterrence while winning that game, and then we have to maintain deterrence thereafter. And we're going to need a global structure that's made of the world's democracies that will include very interesting new friends and partners, from India to, India, Japan, Britain, Australia. I mean, France has just had a tough couple of diplomatic weeks, but France is an essential partner. And looking at the world's geography in a way where each of those states and many others bring a unique advantage to a global coalition, that's going to be essential. So in a way, globalization isn't quite over. It just has to be redone so that it has a lot less to do with our adversaries and a lot more to do with us.
Let me just add one footnote to Mike Thomas and John Edmonds. And that is, what I was really talking about is we have to really think about, are we going to be isolationist? Are we going to be engaged internationally? Or where I would say quasi-isolationist? It's a key question. And when I talk about Russia, and I mention these private, military, covert, implausibly deniable green men, Russia is out around the world in dozens of places in Africa, operating in what we would call covert operations. The one thing we haven't touched on, which is a critical part of my book, and one of the reasons why I got involved in this in the first place, is the new warfare, and that's cyber warfare. And the Russians are been in this business of collecting and penetrating. It's not just penetrating our cyber world, they're using it. And this is unprecedented. And there are no rules of the road. When you're talking about missiles and missile agendas and agreements, you can count missiles. We're in a world where there are no rules. And what I mentioned and touched on is, and you can't have it publicly. There's no agreement. No country's going to agree that they're cyber attacking the other country. But you need to sit down, in the case of the Russians or the Chinese, you have to have an intelligence bilateral discussion. What are we going to do? And the Russians are in our system, deeply into our system, both in collection and action. And what's our response? Our leaders have said they're going to respond in kind. Well, what does that mean? And have you? So this is a very dangerous world, John, as you look out and how we're going to manage that. So, and the last point I would make, what's interesting, because I talked to a lot of people in the intelligence world and defense world, and now they've decided, well, where are we going? Oh, we're going to go China. Now, this is not to diminish one bit anything that Jonathan's saying, but we're going to go, our policy, our grand policy is we're going to go against China. And my point is, can't we get a balance in life somewhere? Can't we try and figure out where, where the balance is. And I'm going to make one last point. I was going through the archives and I was looking at newspapers from 1941, December. And if you read the New York Times in 1941 and you change the word Japan to China, the dialogue is the same. And based on that, I would tell you we're going to go to war with China, except we have fortunately or unfortunately nuclear weapons, and we're not going to go to war with them. But the dialogue is leading in the wrong direction. Now, it may be right-footed. We can argue about it. What I'm saying is we've left the world, and now we're deciding we're going to be China-centric. And as we run the risk if we were terrorism-centric for 20 years and we were war-centric in two countries that, and I'm publicly on record, I think we should have used covert action, but we shouldn't have put armies on the ground. So these are big issues that need to be sorted out. And I think dealing with the Russians, the question is how much time, and there's a number of you in the Foreign Service here, how much time do you actually have to work on multiple targets? And wars are all consuming, and we have to be very careful that we don't get centric about any one theme or we will lose the thread. And I don't want to copy the Russians, but they've got a pretty effective strategy. It's a very clear one, and they're executing it. I disagree with the strategy, but it's clear and it's being executed. We need one like that.
I think we've reached the point that we can. Whoop.
No, you're on mute, John.
I think we've reached the point where we can start getting into audience questions. Some of them sort of follow nicely on some remarks that have already been made by our speakers. I'd like to begin with one from Bob Ning. And this would be addressed toward Jonathan. If a Wall Street Journal article today about China is correct, that Xi Jinping is strongly moving the Chinese economy towards state control and to a new Chinese style of socialism, what will that mean for us economically and specifically our dependence on China as our supplier and customer?
Yeah, it was a very good article. I have it right here, and I appreciated that one as the author was saying Xi Jinping is looking to enact Mao's original vision, which of course is very much what China's vision of victory is about. So I think we're on the same page with that one. And I think insofar as that's true, and it's much more than an economic vision and a vision of control of different industries and all that. I mean, I think it's a far more complex vision than that. But many of Mao's original geopolitical sort of ideas and his concept of where China fit into the world, I mean, those are also very much I think things that Xi harkens back to in a program that's been provided since the beginning, since the formation of the People's Republic of China. So, one of the key points here is that Xi is an heir to a much longer, deeper vision and program. He's not really that original in many ways. So when one looks back and really understands the roots of their vision and strategy, and our dependence on China as our supplier and customer, well, that's part of the problem. You don't want to be in that situation. That's one of the first things that we're going to have to address. And of course, they're busy addressing half of this problem for us. I mean, the word decoupling is something that people use to say, essentially, is there going to be a separation of the two economies? Can you separate the two economies? And a lot of it is the Communist Party is taking many actions there. On one hand, to replace Western sort of technology in their own markets insofar as they're able to create national champions that are able to essentially supply the China market and then go abroad. I mean, those are key pieces of it. And then also to build essentially the world's supply chains sort of closer and tighter into China while also reducing their dependency on the outside world. So, COVID showed us what it's like to be dependent on the PRC for medical supplies and PPE. And, they nationalized the factories of US multinationals and produced only for their domestic needs for a time. I mean, these I think have already led to the questions in Washington and in Congress about securing supply chains, reducing the China dependency. And in the meantime, the party wants to reduce its dependency on the US to the extent that it can. So again, that goes back to the economic side of this, where, you know, in my opinion, I mean, what you really need to achieve is a kind of economic containment of China, where you have cut off inputs to the growth of the People's Republic of China, you know, really sort of put a stop to their ascendancy in that regard. And that's really Western capital, technology, and export markets. And you start to reduce those inputs to their growth. And it's a very different problem set. At that point, we're not dealing with a China that's surpassing us. We're dealing with a China that's much more stagnant, and where we can find, you know, other ways to handle our needs. You know, and principally in this case, I think it has a great deal to do with supply chains. I mean, that's one of the first things that the Biden administration, I think, is looking to achieve. And you know, if they succeed at that, that's going to be very important to be able to secure certain key supply chains. And you look at the Quad meeting coming this week in DC, and the fact that people are talking about the potential for the Quad to resolve certain supply chains, you know, amongst its members as alternatives to China. I mean, those are very good steps. It can be done. I think it can be done. You just have to be focused on these questions. And to continue with this idea that the economic interdependency, you know, is somehow going to stabilize the relationship or prevent military actions, I think is just, you know, that's just not true in history. I mean, the world trading system has not prevented world wars by any means.
Just a couple of comments on that of my own, Jonathan. The news out of Wall Street yesterday and its reaction to this corporate debt problem, which may be larger than just the one company, shows sort of the difficulties of disintegration or decoupling of our economy and the world economy from China's. That's one observation. Then the second thing, I would just ask you to explain to the membership a little more your reference to the Quad. Not everybody is familiar with that sort of diplomatic term. I myself was involved in the very early stages and remember being sort of slapped down and trying to push the envelope and adding a security dimension to its agenda, which at that stage, the Indians were certainly not ready for. But if you could maybe address those two things, the difficulties of decoupling economically, the practical difficulties, if you will, and then second, explain the Quad a little better.
Yeah, and the Quad, you know, the quadrilateral security dialogue, i.e. it's a grouping of the US, India, Japan, and Australia that has initially been pretty security focused, but I think it's starting to develop an economic dimension that's very important. And it's essentially a balancing coalition, if we're honest about it. I mean, it's something that's meant to create, to support a free and open Indo-Pacific and to mitigate the potential for the CCP to dominate the region. So I think from that basic framework, there are many things it can do and directions it can go, and you add the potential of those four countries together and you can do quite a lot. So meeting in Friday in DC, heads of state in-person meeting. So this should be very important. And hopefully there'll be some news cycle that you know, captures some of that and sees the importance of this group. And as to the difficulties of decoupling, I mean, certainly the most substantial ones are that you know, since WTO entry, China has become essentially the manufacturing base for many industries and for many multinational corporations, and you know, also a market for many companies that are you know, in there and have been building into that for decades at this point. So and at the end of the day, I mean, this is sort of a matter of policy, but it's also a matter of corporate strategy, because if you're a business leader today and you're looking at your future in China, and I do a lot of work with large companies now on these sorts of risks, and you know, the risk assessment that allows you to make long-term bets in the China market while also realizing that the US-China relationship has deteriorated so substantially, you know, while looking at, let's say, from a financial corporation's point of view, what's happened in the technology sector, with the crackdowns with Evergrande this week, with all of these real problems, I think it's going to become far riskier for businesses to look at China as a viable cornerstone to their own strategy, whether it's their growth strategy, their supply chain strategy, or anything else, or even more broadly as a viable cornerstone in the world economy. And I think that's the challenge that we're really going to be faced with, is how do you create how do you rebuild pieces of America? How do you build alternative centers for manufacturing around the alliance system or in other emerging markets that could go more to the US side? And how do you rebuild a world economy that doesn't have this dependence on China? And I think a lot of that is a sort of gradual, systematic changing of our supply chains and of corporate growth strategies. Wall Street, I think, is a very unforgiving friend, really. I mean, eventually they will be looking at not only Chinese companies that are having these problems. And I've been saying this to Wall Street audiences for a long time now, so I feel somewhat vindicated in a lot of that. But they will also be looking at Western multinationals that have too much China exposure once the real geopolitical issues set in, and they'll be punishing the multinationals that don't have a way out. I believe that's coming. The geopolitics are not going to improve. So what has to improve are the corporate strategies.
Switching gears here, I've got a question that is right up Jack's alley. It definitely has a strong intel component, which is from Bill Keller. Can you please ask Jack to comment on Havana Syndrome and his view of the threat to our overseas diplomats?
Well, I have to confess, I really don't know the bottom line, but what we now have is the State Department, all the federal agencies that have embassies abroad. And I believe just today, there's a case involving the director of CIA. One of his staff is, they're being diagnosed for having, and I think it was in India, been subjected to something that resembles the Havana Syndrome. So I don't know enough about the medical. I don't think there's enough out in the public record about how we're exactly examining it. I would say, and I want to be careful because I'm not saying that an adversary is doing it. I'm not saying that it is in fact foreign country inspired, but in the world of technology going back, and this is in the public record, 30 years, 40 years, people did beam things off of embassies. You wanted to detect how a typewriter, what was being typed, who uses a typewriter, right? But I guess the same would be with a PC. And that is, you could get the vibrations off the window. So there may be intelligence collection technology out there. I'm just putting this as a hypothetical. And whether or not there's unintended consequences, I don't know. So I want to take a pass, other than when all of our foreign focused agencies are identifying syndromes and taking it seriously, I want to take it seriously. I do have trouble accepting that, and again, I was wrong on the election in 2016. I have trouble seeing that anyone is so brash to take a physical act against us and think it is going to go unchallenged. So, but I said, I didn't think the Russians, it wasn't that they were collecting intelligence, that they were using it in our political process. So I'm prepared to be wrong again, but it is so audacious for any foreign government to physically hurt a competitor. It is unprecedented, largely unprecedented. There might be one off case here or there in the entire history of the Cold War. So I'm saying if it's happening, it is off of the playbook. And another reason we got to get back to the table, if this is going on, it has to stop, or we have to respond, and that gets really ugly.
Yeah, it's an alarming escalation of tactics used against our diplomats. As the questioner mentioned, it first arose in Havana. I used to be on the Cuba desk and was always on the phone with people in the political section of our interests section there who were subject to the kind of harassment, like their tires were deflated, or blatant stealing and stuff like that. And you suddenly go from that to beaming in on people's brains. If it really is happening, it's frightening.
A totally different ball game, and that's why they have to get to the bottom. It's not just, it is important for the health and well-being, but there's a bigger issue of what is our relationship going to be with any government that thinks they can be so hostile towards us. I mean, that cannot go unchecked.
Right. I'm going to swing back in the direction of China now. I have a question from Joe, who's been helping out with tech matters tonight, as usual. He says the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff recently commented in regard to China's first strike capability, "We are out of time." What do you think this means for our strategic planning, especially in the nuclear submarine program area?
Can you unpack that a little bit? I mean, he's saying we're out of time in what regard?
Okay, well, maybe Joe could, Joe, you're part of the administrative team here, so if you want to speak up yourself, why don't you just do that?
It was a comment by General Hinote to Congress, and so I'm just curious about what you guys thought about. Was a comment more to get Congress's attention to, put more military support in the South China Sea? Did it have any impact with the nuclear submarine to Austria? Does it mean anything? Maybe it means nothing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, this is obviously a very important piece of the U.S.-China picture is the survivable second strike that both countries possess, and the triad that we possess, and the fact that hopefully would add a level of deterrence to any potential conflict and keep it below the nuclear threshold. But I think what our Stratcom is saying, and others are saying, is that China's looking to massively increase its strike capability and the numbers, just plain and simple, and that's going to create a very dangerous world for us. And I think what this means for us in terms of military dynamics is, China has a few different pieces of doctrine militarily that count here. I mean, one is the idea of active defense, the idea that they're essentially defending even when they have territorial claims. So they have territorial claims with India, with the South China Sea, with the East China Sea, with Japan. They have a lot of historical claims as they see it, which puts them at odds with a lot of nation states. And if they see that all as essentially defensive, which is how they teach it in their thinking, militarily and all the rest of it, and ideologically across the country, and they're building conventional forces that are designed to win those conflicts, and then they're building nuclear forces that are designed to back up their conventional forces. Is that actually a defensive posture, or is that simply using a nuclear backstop for conventional aggression, which is what we're probably likely to see if deterrence fails? We're likely to see just a plain old territorial aggression from China, and then they'll have a nuclear force that can back it up. And they also have this idea of war control, which means that they think that they can control conflict as long as they have the right variables in place. So I talk about this in the book, but it's a very dangerous concoction here to have a sense that you are behaving defensively by seizing territory, that you can control a war, and now you're expanding your nuclear forces because you realize that doing that puts you directly into confrontation with the United States. So I think this is one of the things that to me is, very much underestimated in US discourse about China, is their willingness to use force. I think is extremely high. And I say that as a historian of China's wars in the 20th century. I mean, they fought wars with India, with Vietnam, with the United Nations in Korea, with the Soviet Union, which is far superior. They did all of that in a very relatively brief time during the founding decades of the PRC. And that was Mao's sort of, placing of China in confrontation with the world, which she is now very much a student of all that and an heir to all of that. So I think we need to understand that they're building a military, I believe, with the desire to use it. And it's up to us to maintain deterrence, which isn't just a military issue, it's also a communication issue, in such a way that we prevent them from doing that, because they had no problem doing that in the past. And how they do that is for very complex reasons in each case. A lot of it is to strike at other states whom they believe they have a disagreement with. That's the history.
I'd like to start where John started. John, I'd like to start on Jonathan's point and Joe's point.
Sure.
We need a strategy here. How are we going to what are we arraying ourselves against? And are we organizing ourselves for some nuclear exchange with the Chinese? I mean, a submarine battle? I mean, we really need to go back to what is the world going to look like? And I'm telling you, on the other hand, the Russians are going into military below the radar confrontations around the world. And what are we going to do about that? How much are we going to play on the international scene? Before we jump in, and this is what I'm worried about, how we spent $17 trillion in the last few years on military activities. And there's an awful lot of people that have a stake in the game. They're looking for what's the next way to armor. And I'm not opposed to it. I think we have to have the strongest military, but I think we're lacking in essence. How do we want to array ourselves? It's simply let's array ourselves against China and some sort of military exchange. I think that's a very short-sighted and limited plan of action that can be temptingly self-fulfilling.
I think that also this discussion raises the question of what is our broader approach to arms control? Is it possible to have a strategy that is triangular in nature? Would the Russians even contemplate going along with it? As you well know, Jack, better than anyone here, the Russians have walked away from numerous arms control treaties. In the Cold War, we had sort of siloed off these arms control agreements that we'd reached, and they were verifiable to a large extent. Now we've lost most of that with the exception of one. And the question is it even possible to try to integrate the Chinese in a new round of talks? Is that something that is still part of the national diplomatic arsenal, if you will?
I think everyone's running in the wrong direction. In other words, it's going to be hard to lasso everyone into it. But as hard as that may be, John, what I said earlier is, how do you rope in this cyber, very high risk business we're in? You can't even see it. At least we could count the missiles with some degree of accuracy. So I think we're in a very dangerous area. And I think the short answer to it, I think it's going to be really hard to rein it in. But that's where I would put, the policy emphasis is trying to get some understanding, and instead of figuring out how we're going to, I think we need to spend time on how we're going to be competitive. I think we need to spend some time figuring out how we're going to be cooperative.
Right. There's a question.
John, can I
Yes.
jump? It's Christine. Can I jump in for
Sure.
a second? I would kind of like with this discussion, but to circle back to, I think one of the comments Jack made in the very beginning, which, I feel strongly about, and I'm curious how you both, Jack and Jonathan, feel about this, which is the degree to which the United States itself is so divided in so many ways, politically and just everything, philosophically, everything, that it's one thing for it. To me, it seems like an intellectual discussion. The United States has these capabilities, which I'm sure we do, vis-a-vis Russia or China or anybody else. But if we remain as divided as we are right now with our own survival, our own philosophy here that we can't agree upon, to what degree do you think we're our greatest adversary and our greatest hurdle in dealing with these other issues? And to what degree, obviously, can that be exploited, which it already has been probably, but I'm interested in your thoughts about that.
I'm an advocate for covert action, and that's just one slice of policy. But one of the things that's necessary is bipartisan support. We need a bipartisan foreign policy. There can't be, investigations within investigation about who's doing what in this. We really need to decide. I used to brief down on the Hill when I was doing Afghanistan, and I got as much support from the Democrats as I got from the Republicans. Here, take more money, take more. And it was hard to distinguish. The relationships meeting with them, dealing with them, they dealt with each other much differently. But the Cold War united people in a common national security policy. Terrorism did, but it was because it wasn't state related, it allowed for fissures in it. I think we really need leaders who take us back genuinely into bipartisan, or coming back to, I said, Tip O'Neill, you got to get it right at home. And I think that's what you're saying, Chrissy. We got to get it right at home before we develop out our plans. And we're sadly not there. And I'm hoping that things are deteriorating to a point in this regard that, some wise people will finally get around and say, look, we got to stop this. We got to figure it out. Let's fight about some domestic things, but let's get this foreign policy piece right. And I don't know who mentioned it, somebody in the group, leadership is critical here. And not just one, not just in the White House, different power centers in this country, including the media, need to get on the same wicket about what's best for this country. Because we're facing huge challenges. No one can dispute that. And we're, as that young woman said, we don't know where we're going.
Right, I agree, Jack. I mean, partisanship is obviously probably one of the absolute worst things that's happening in the United States and to the United States. I mean, divided we fall and united we stand. It really has been true of this country probably for as long as it's existed. And we're going to have to find common ground on not only our strategic issues, but on everything else that allows us to function as a country in the world and that allows us to be an example to others in the world. And I think we still do retain this incredibly powerful example. And I experienced that throughout all my years abroad. I was in lots and lots of different countries, and so many people just wanted to come to America, live in America, immigrate to America, become part of America. And that is absolutely unique on the planet. And I think that unfortunately, it seems that in America, we are the ones that can't see that about ourselves. And yet I had just firsthand experience of all kinds of countries and all kinds of people that believed in the United States. It wasn't really a world that hated us by any means. I think it was a world that wanted to come and be a part of it, and that saw us as having an essential role, and we have to live up to that. I mean, you look at, for example, the young people in Hong Kong waving the American flags, and we've been the symbol of freedom all over the planet, including in China today. So let's not forget that, and I think we need to live up to that. And that's that has a lot to do with settling our own differences and realizing that there's something far greater than ourselves that we are responsible to at the end. That's the broader world.
One of the things we need to realize, and this is one of the hypotheses, take that back. One of the things I state boldly in the Spymaster's prison, our adversaries are aware of this weakness. They're not oblivious to it. And the reason why the Russians were intervening wasn't really about which candidate. It is about keeping us in this fight among ourselves on pick your issue. It's just to keep us off balance. And I think we need to recognize how easily in the age of the internet, we can allow ourselves to be manipulated. And as part of our adversaries, a potential adversary strategy, we're sleeping, I think, through this. And, on our adversaries, it's not like we're the only ones that have this discussion here. Our adversaries sit around and say, look at this. How do we take advantage of this? And that's my clarion cry, if you will. Let's get some focus on this.
Right. Unfortunately, China policy is an area of serious bipartisanship right now in Washington. So fortunately, we're able to, I think, people across the aisle can see eye to eye on many of these issues, and some really important stuff is being done in a bipartisan way. So I think we have that place in which it's been very productive in recent years, very, very active. But I think, again, we need to, we can't, my concern personally at this point is that Washington versus the People's Republic of China is just not enough. It has to be the United States of America coming together. We can't have Wall Street investing in them and Hollywood making movies for the adversary and Washington fighting this, really difficult contest against a very, systematic and strategic adversary. We've got to see this problem as a country, and we've got to get in the game as a country and be united on these issues, because we're dealing with something that's, it's not just China, it's the whole coalition they can bring to this. I mean, Russia, Iran, you name it. It's going to be a very tough time for America, and we've got to be focused.
Jonathan and I have fun at times because we disagree on certain things. There's areas of huge agreement, and this is one of them, and that is just because we have a consensus on China that they're our adversary, we got to do everything we can. That may not be the best place. I mean, I think there needs to be a consensus about we have to deal with China. The issue is how are we going to deal with them? And I think we have to be careful that we don't make it a military contest here solely. I mean, I think Jonathan's point, we have to have a strong economy here. We have to regain our momentum, and we have to take care of ourselves and build ourselves up so that we're competitive in this. It's too easy now to have this knee-jerk reaction. Well, now we need a policy. Let's make it, we're all going to go against China. So I think we have to be careful, despite the fact that everything Jonathan's saying about the threat that they present is real. I'm concerned about the momentum towards it, that it blinds us to how we go about it. So there's a nuance here between Jonathan and me, and I allow that he could be right, but I've seen Washington stampede themselves. Well, we can talk about some recent wars. Stampede.
Well,
Yeah, it kind of ties in with a question that one of our board members has. She put it, Jack hits on a key point, the US identity on the global stage. We used to be the unchallenged top gun, but have we the means and the public will to remain top gun? Can we afford to deal with all the ills around the world, including Russia and China? What is our identity? And I would add to that, a little observation of my own. I was part of the same national security establishment you were, Jack. You were in longer. I was in 25 years. But I think that the twin fiascos that we immersed ourselves in Afghanistan and Iraq really turned off a large segment of the American public, which has lost faith in the national security establishment and doesn't necessarily want to hear more clever recommendations from them as to what our international posture ought to be. There's a great deal of cynicism, and can you blame them? I mean, nobody at the outset was talking about spending $1 trillion in Afghanistan, and the sort of accretion of misrepresentations over the years about how we were doing and building up the Afghan national security forces, and the same sorts of things could be said about our many missteps in Iraq. We've got to, we can't take for granted that the great American public is going to go rah rah rah. Let's get behind the latest policy prescriptions that our national security establishment has put together.
We're tired. I think people are tired. You're fighting a war for 20 years. And all of you have been in the government. It's all consuming. When you start fighting all your resources, your culture and every agency that's involved changes to meet that threat. And it's one thing if you do it for 3 years, you do it for 20, you have major cultural change, which is hard to bring about. Now you have to reset this. And it's people are tired. They've been on a certain plane. I do think this country inherently is gifted with, the democracy is a real strength. I mean, you can't underestimate it. This is a rich country and powerful, but I think there's this tendency now, I think, to come back home, right? And I understand that, and they don't want to get more involved. So this is why I use the word, when I invented, I think, quasi-isolation. I think everyone wants to come back, but I think we know we have to be in the game. And my point is, we're in the game how do we work with our allies, John, as you were suggesting? How do we counter the green men? So there is a covert, there is a role. And this is where, what is the strategy? I understand this tremendous pull towards isolation. I think there's going to be less support, than we think in terms of China. Okay, you can do your China and we can spend money, but don't get us too far involved. I think that'll be the American sentiment, but it takes leadership again. And I don't think just pounding on China is necessarily the leadership will get it stirred up. So I think we have the capability deal with it. But I think right now, I think America, we have to recognize where are we? And I think Americans are tired of the involvement abroad, and we have to be careful we don't overreact and pulling ourselves too far. But I think that's where the momentum here is at home, and yet abroad you have very aggressive. Jonathan's hitting it on the head on how aggressive, and I'm telling you how aggressive Russia is, how Iran's aggressive, and they're looking at us as that they can push the envelope further. And our tendency right now is, I think, oh, enough is enough. And I think we have to be very careful we don't fall into that trap. Again, we need bipartisan support, and we need leadership that says, let's look at how we are going to be engaged, but we're going to have a lower military footprint.
We got a question from Robert Meyer that deals with the economic synergy between Russia and China. Is there enough of it to keep them together, to keep them de facto allied going forward?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, insofar as the energy trade is the backbone of the relationship. I mean, one of China's key geographical problems is energy security, and the fact that their imports come through the Strait of Malacca and in the Indo-Pacific from the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, and they have to basically deal with that military geography, as military geography, sea line protection and all that kind of thing. But then they have this big backdoor supplier that goes over land, and that's a far easier problem, a far easier thing for them to deal with geographically than managing the supplies from the Indian Ocean, essentially from the Persian Gulf, from Africa. So I think that's a pretty substantial reason for the relationship to stay together. I mean, as a Russia scholar at Oxford once told me, the Russians will always be able to sell guns, grain, and oil. And China's going to be a big market for all of that. And for the Chinese, they have to provide food security and energy security. I mean, these are just the fundamental basics. I mean, the Belt and Road is explained to a certain degree by those needs, but then the Russia-China relationship, I think very much has an economic raison d'etre that, and on the other hand, I think that the tension that they're ultimately going to create for each other as two dictatorships is going to be so substantial that there probably will be a window eventually for Russia to I think abandon its current orientation towards Beijing, but that's not there yet.
Jonathan, I'm glad you put the last note on, because we were going to have another disagreement, but that bails us out of that. I think Jonathan's right, certainly in the short term, but two things I would say. They're natural. Remember, both countries were communist countries, and when I went to buy, and this is not a state secret, by the way, I bought most of the weapons we fought with against the Russians in China. And I remember, why am I getting good prices? Oh, you're fighting the Russians. So there are deep-seated historical differences. They have a huge border, and to some degree, Russia is a much smaller economic base than the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of ingredients here, plus Jonathan's point about being two autocratic states. We provide a great opportunity because we're the sort of the common enemy. The less that's true, I mean, if it becomes more true, then the Russians have to decide which side they want to be on here, or they want to be neutral. But I do think for the short haul, Jonathan's after a lot going for us, plus the common, who were the happiest people and how we left Afghanistan. I would submit that, I watched the Russians leave across Friendship Bridge. Let me tell you, it was Putin's day to see us leave. And the Chinese, we're the common enemy or the common person they dislike on the block, but that's not guaranteed as a lifetime relationship. And so I think there's a lot of built in, using Jonathan's word, tension, but it's not today's issue. But remember the old Sino-Soviet split and all of that. So I think Jonathan queued it up just right. But I do remember looking in the eyes of the Chinese, and they really did like bringing damage to the Russians.
We I got a question from our member Jim DeBello here. Much has been written about China's population replacement deficit, coupled with Xi's revisionist Central Command economy vision. What is your opinion about the combination potentially slowing down China's economic innovation and entrepreneurship to the West's advantage?
It's a very important question. And I mean, these dynamics, I think, have a lot to do with our relationship to the Chinese economy. And the way that I look at it is, yes, the demographics are going to turn against them really in the 2030s. That's when that sinks in. Debt could turn against them as soon as that we're seeing a very big story about that emerge with Evergrande. But they have a massive debt problem as well. And eventually these things all harmonize to harm their, to really hurt their growth and sort of change the trajectory. But the question is, does that kick in before or after they become the world's largest economy? And I think that has a great deal to do with how the West engages or disengages from China. I mean, if we enable this through, providing foreign direct investment, through providing technology, whether we intend to or not, if we enable it through, you see the BlackRock sort of approach to China, and that's sort of taking the lead to say, let's all be in this market. It's a growing market. We want to be there as essentially as bankers. I mean, those kinds of things are enabling functions. And if you start to disable those functions, then those trends, the real structural problems of the Chinese economy actually start to kick in. So again, this question, I think, has a lot to do with what we do now. And that's why I think US policy and, has to be centered on certain forms of economic disengagement. And we have to lead that among our allies, because as was pointed out earlier, I mean, if Germany under Merkel and her successor are going to, treat China as an economic partner, I mean, one, that places them wholly out of step with the Western alliance. And France isn't on that page for everything that happened in the past week. I mean, France does fully understand the Indo-Pacific. And now Britain's more engaged. And there's, Germany is going to be out of step with pretty much the entire security picture if they proceed along those lines. But ultimately you have to get everybody to move together to start to diversify away from China as a essential piece of our economic structure. And I think that that's where policy needs to focus. There are plenty of things that can be done to achieve that, but diplomacy will be important in that, and creating alternatives so that it's not simply taking a haircut, but rebuilding other things in other places that enable us to ultimately.
That ties right into a question that's been up for some time now from member Bill Thayer, and I think this is predicated on the knowledge that San Diego in particular has an economy that's quite integrated with Mexico's. Could we encourage Mexico, same per capita GDP as China, to set up special economic zones so US companies could move their operations from China to Mexico? SEZ could not be used to move jobs from the US to Mexico, however.
Bill, I think this is a great point. I mean, it's something I've thought about a lot. I mean, I'm a huge fan of what's possible with Mexico now. I mean, I think the USMCA is very interesting, and ultimately you need a North American economic concept that provides a fundamental, a new approach to the world economy. Because yes, I mean, we could do so much working with Mexico and Canada to pull together some of these options, and special economic zones in the Southwest is a really exciting idea. I'd love to see more of that, and create policy incentives for that to flourish. And then I think at the end of the day, I mean, this is going to be a very, very important piece to it. I mean, what can we do here in North America? We need a national manufacturing strategy that includes our closest neighbors and trading partners. And I think that's one of the things that the Biden administration, I mean, if President Biden could achieve 3 strategic moves, in my opinion, it would be secure supply chains, build and execute a national manufacturing strategy, and cut off direct investment into China through financial corporations. When you do those 3 things, and we've changed all the dynamics here very quickly.
We have a question about balancing economic power and human rights considerations, both in China and Russia. And what about also the importance of so-called soft power as a component of our foreign policy. Either gentleman, please respond.
Well, soft power, I mean, needs to be, I mean, it's always been part of our program and it needs to continue to be. I want to come back to the Russians. Part of their strategy is using soft power, you know, trying to influence and create environments out there that are unfavorable for us. It's not, you know, their hybrid strategy. And again, cyber is used very extensively, and if you want to call it soft power, to undermine our position. So you need both, and I would say if you look at this hybrid strategy, the Russians, they've combined it. We really have. You know, the question is, how well are we doing it? How well are they doing it? I don't think there's any dispute anymore about the importance of soft power. It's probably the wrong word because it's stronger than soft, more impactful. So, yeah.
And I think soft power on you know, the Chinese Communist Party side is something that we you know, depending on how you define it, it's something that we really underestimate. Because on one hand, I mean, both of our, you know, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have acknowledged that there's a genocide happening in Xinjiang, and right in front of us. Here we are in the 21st century with a genocide taking place in a major industrialized nation. And yet a billion-person market, and yet Nike in China, and yet Apple in China, and Disney in China. I mean, you know, that's quite a bit of influence in the world over how people see right and wrong. So, you know, we underestimate that at our peril. And I think that's why some hard decisions need to be made on the economic front in order to be consistent with our values and ultimately to set us up for, you know, on the right path strategically.
We've had more impact in the third, I don't know how we want to describe it to be politically correct. In our adversaries in autocratic states, you tend not to make a lot of progress on human rights. You should be trying, you should be using every vehicle, UN, media, whatever. But I must tell you, I watched the issue human rights in the 70s and started with Jimmy Carter. And I didn't think it was saleable, but you know, every government agency pushed hard on it, and we actually made progress, particularly in Latin America. So, you know, it is a noble thing to push for human rights, but let's not get overly confident, because I'm just telling you, the Russians and the Chinese were looking at strong men, and they're not, you know, they're not going to respond as easily to the pressures that we might bring, and that we really only have soft power at this time.
You know, I can't let you go, Jack. I know we're getting to the end here without asking a question about what might be an advance in sort of techno war. You know, we've had our drones operating out of Pakistan, targets in Afghanistan, et cetera, for 20 years. The front page story of the New York Times on Sunday is about a robotic operated machine gun that took out the head of the Iranian nuclear program. Is this going to be a new frontier of, you know, assassination by robot? What kind of escalation, if any, do you foresee as a result of that?
I'm discouraging assassination as policy by any government. And the United States has been really very careful since the 60s. There were some adventures that never really took place, but they you know, there were in the 60s, both around the world, people were doing these crazy things. I was running the Afghan program. We brought the Stinger into the battlefield. We also brought GPS, but I wasn't smart enough to realize I could be a billionaire if I saw the commercial benefit of GPS. But it's a one weapon system that really changed the course of that war. I don't see anything out there at this minute, but the most likely thing is something in somebody's lab. Is it electromagnetic? Is it something in the cyber field? But you know, a machine gun that assassinates people is probably not something that's going to be a winning combination for long. We use drones. I use drones because I ran the program in Latin America against the narcotics people. And it was a great intelligence platform. And then some very smart guy said, listen, why don't we put some Hellfire missiles on it and use it against the terrorists? And that was a changing, it was both the intelligence community nor the military wanted drones in the beginning. Jim Woolsey had to take money out of his pocket in the agency to get the drone because pilots wanted to fight pilots, and we didn't think it had practical value. Well, it became a great intelligence platform. Everybody has it. So he was a visionary on that point. So there may be something out there, but I think it has to be different than some. I think I would be worried about the capacity to use cyber, that you can bring things to a halt and no one realizes you can bring them to the halt. And, you can smell it already that it's out there and you don't know exactly who has it and what is your defensive capability. So I think that's where I would be looking for it. One last thing, I used to not like spy movies, but Jason Bourne was really interesting because we had all that technology, that great movie, but it was integrated. But what you knew was going to happen is Jason Bourne's platforms that were being used 5 years later were the reality. So go to Hollywood and see what they're saying are doing the new weapon system, and they're probably going to be closer to the mark. And I'm only being partially facetious.
Christine, do you want to add some closing remarks here? I think we're over our time limit.
I do. But before I do that, I just want to comment too. What about germ warfare?
Well, this is like counterfeiting. Once you release, the germs, you've got to be careful it doesn't infect your home court.
Right.
And I think, every major state probably has really exotic, lethal, biological weapons that would destroy mankind, so I think it's like mutual destruction. That bottle won't be open until, in the same context of when do you actually have a nuclear strike against major powers. And I would say not in my lifetime, but maybe that's not too long.
And I guess, did we leave on a little bit of a negative note in that the human rights issue, some of the other questions, or a couple of questions that framed it, maybe American values, and that, things like human rights, I think a lot of Americans consider that a part of our DNA. Is there a red line, or most of the discussion tonight was military or or covert?
Well, let me speak loudly.
And economic. And so are those the pillars of the game? And anything, I was a democracy officer, that's part of why I'm interested. Do we in a way, are you saying that that's just absolutely the frosting on a cake?
No, to be clear, that's part of being an American.
Right. But do we have a line in the sand for any of those things?
Well,
what we're talking about with adversaries or not, I mean, take China and the Uyghurs as an example. Is there a line in the sand or not really?
I do not recommend the use of force. In other words, if you want to bring the Chinese to bear on human rights, using force is not my recommended. I think you have to take it to the high moral ground. Mm-hmm. I thought I was at a great advantage in struggling with the Russians during the Cold War, because by the time we were deep into the Cold War, communism, no one wanted to buy that product. It was just stale. I mean, Russians were holding together because of identity with their country. We had a real product, and that was a country, and I believe it's still highly saleable, of liberty. I mean, you can call them cliches, but they're real, and they're real around the world. The reason people are packing into this country, it's a land of opportunity. You can say what you want. I left Chile, and people were put in jail for saying things. I get off the plane, and you can criticize the president of the United States and get away with it. Human rights. I said for the last almost 50 years, we've pushed it around the world, and I think genuinely pushed it. But Christine, and I think it's been very effective. But I'm not.
Is there a role for the grand strategy? Is there a strong role of that type of American value? Or is that just a wish list in the grand strategy?
I think it's very, very important. And when I was writing my book, I really, at the end, I realized that in many ways what I was writing about was human rights. I mean, that's why this matters. It's why it matters who succeeds in becoming the centerpiece of the world power structure. And at the end of the day, you know, I mean, the United States has these ideals that we strive to live up to, and in many cases succeed. And, you know, and that versus something that is so, I think, destructive, and visibly and on, you know, on display to the world at this point in those forms. And, you know, I think that's the struggle we've probably gone throughout much of history, just as humanity. And we have to win because of that. It's a vision of where the human being sits in the world. And you just have to defend freedom, I think. And I mean that deeply, not superficially. And I think it's very important that on one hand, that we also provide, you know, people are going to want to escape from these places more and more. And I think we want to ensure that the free world is a home for those who wish to come to it as these walls begin to go up. Which they will.
We've been down this road. We don't seem to learn the lesson about nation building. People need to want human rights in their own countries. They have to believe that this is something that they want, and they have to become participants in it. It's not enough for us to lecture countries around the world, and we have to recognize the limitations of this. We cannot force people. We can be spokesmen. We can point in the right direction. We can cajole, but it's a mistake to go beyond that. And this is where we get into trouble, when we think we are going to go and the people in that country are not ready for it, not prepared to take it on themselves. So it's a cautionary note, because I do think we're on the high ground, but we also must recognize the inherent limitations of using power, covert or overt, to try and force a change in human rights. I think we need to be very careful.
And I wasn't espousing hard power when I asked that question. Just the FYI, I spent 4 years, 2000 to 2004, in Belarus on a democracy program. So, you know, you're speaking
That
to
worked
the
out.
choir.
That worked out well.
That worked out well. But it did, and we'll have you back for another discussion, because you two have because it's not a simple answer.
They're doing at the borders today.
I know.
Friends, how they feel about Belarus.
Pushing them into Poland, yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
a sad story.
Anyway, thank you both. Clearly, we, and certainly I, and I'm sure John, but I'm sure most of the members as well, could probably go on for another couple of hours. There's so much to talk about, and you both bring, you know, such a wealth of information and strong fact-based opinions to the table, and we really appreciate it. And I want to seriously remind our members, and I don't get paid for this, I'm doing it because the books are really interesting. The part that I've read have just been fascinating. And I think you can tell from tonight. Sorry?
Okay.
Sorry?
No, I was going to say, you held up Jonathan's book 13 seconds longer, then you put it
Oh,
up.
sorry.
Player. Not like John. You're a fair
Okay,
player.
everybody, is it fair?
Yeah.
No, they're both absolutely outstanding. So I encourage you to read them, and
It's a
we'd
great,
love to have you back.
and it's a great group and a great organization, and thank you. And I'm sure, Jonathan, you want to say thank you, but it's been fun. The questions have been really, as far as I'm concerned, substantive and thoughtful. And I enjoyed that immensely.
Thank you, Alexa. Speaking on behalf of our members, we have, and I told you that at the beginning, we have, and I need to say this when they're listening, because I say it to other people, and I think if they hear it and they don't know I say it to their face, they'll think it's an insult. So I always say that they're smarty pants, and I mean that as a compliment, because they are really smart. They do their homework, and they ask really, really relevant fact-based questions. And so thank you both again. John, as always, thank you. You did an amazing job, as I knew that you would. And Joe, behind the screen there, thank you for your Zoom effort. All of you members, thank you for joining us tonight. And Joe, if you want to quickly put on the next event slide. So in October, let's see if he'll put a share screen, but just to remind you, in October, we're going to have 2 speakers on different nights. We're going to have Peter Nunez on Wednesday, the 13th, and Alan Burson on Tuesday, the 19th of next month. Basically, they'll both be talking about politics and a broken immigration system, and they'll be sharing their respective experiences, different administrations and so forth. Both of these speakers should be absolutely great. So please sign up for the 2 events. Again, it's Wednesday the 13th and Tuesday the 19th, our usual time. And yeah, let's just see that. And then for the members that are already here, thank you for being members. Please maintain your membership. Please encourage others. You know, we really, so many of us work hard to bring really great speakers, as we did today. These are 2 really great speakers. We did record the session. We're going to be putting it, you know, up, and we share it with some of the other World Affairs Councils. And then we had a corporate sponsorship last slide, but I'm not sure if that actually made it through tonight. So if that corporate sponsorship slide doesn't go up, I just want to say thank you to our corporate sponsors and the generous members and the donators. So we can't do it without you. Thank you so much. We'll see you twice next month. Jonathan, Jack, again, thank you both so much. And hope we sell a lot of your books. And with our current events ever evolving, we'll have you back soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.